Hi everyone, this is part of my series that I like to call the fine print, where we go into detail about specific features in our cameras, and I give you also some tips and tricks. Now this is actually a continuation of my previous video on in-camera focus stacking on the new Olympus OM-1. And in that video, basically I kind of got you started using that particular feature, some of the basic settings, and then how to take some pictures. Today we're going to go into a lot more detail about very specific settings, the setting the number of shots, the focus differential, and also if you'd like to use flash. So let's get started. Now, some of the most common questions I got from my previous video had to do with the starting focus point in focus stacking. And it is different than when you're doing focus bracketing. With focus bracketing, yes, you do want to start at the closest focus point that you want in focus, and then the camera will step away from that and go out to infinity or whatever number of steps you set when it's doing its focus bracketing sequence. In focus stacking, you actually want to start somewhere in the center, and then the camera will automatically back up the focus to a starting point and then step forward out to infinity or whatever you have set in the camera. So that is different. So generally speaking, in focus stacking mode, you want to focus somewhere in the middle of the entire length or distance that you have. So if we look at the same flower I took a picture of in the last video, I started my focus point here in the center, and then in focus stacking mode, it will automatically move the focus point back and then start taking pictures and bracketing, stepping backwards based on the settings that you have in the camera. So that's focus stacking. With focus bracketing, you actually do want to start at the closest focus point that you want in focus, and then the camera automatically step backwards, again, depending on the settings that you have. Now let me give you a couple more quick tips when you're doing focus stacking in camera. And I actually learned these from my viewers here in the comment section from the last video. But I mentioned that when you're doing focus stacking in camera, it crops in slightly on the original image. And you have to account for that when you're doing your framing. And what I didn't notice was there's actually a very fine line or square outline of what the final cropped image is going to be. So you already have the crop lines built in when you activate the in-camera focus stacking, so you don't have to really guess. Now, another great tip I got from one of my viewers was actually about assigning the star ratings. And basically what I did in the previous videos, I pushed play, I clicked OK, I did rating, and then I clicked up one to assign a single star, as you can see. But let's undo that. A better way to do it actually is when you're in star rating, you just click the ISO button. And then you'll see up here in the top left, it assigned the star rating, and I can click it again to take the star rating off. Now I'm going to expand on this a little bit to make it even a little bit easier, particularly when you're in focus stacking mode. So the first thing we need to do is go into the menu, and we just need to go into shooting menu number 1, the first one, and scroll down here to image review. And the default setting might be 0.3 or 0.5, but I'm going to change this to auto if I plan on doing a lot of focus stacking type images that day. And then we're done there. So now let's turn on focus stacking and just do a quick shot. Make sure my focus point, let's see, there. When this image is done, I won't have to push the play button. The image will come up automatically. And the image it shows will be the final stacked image. And now all I have to do is push the ISO button, and then I can tap the shutter button, and I'm done. The other thing is, while we're in this image, if I push and hold the ISO button, I can, and rotate the front dial, I can increase or decrease the star rating, like so. And then I can toggle the star rating on and off. And the star rating it assigns will be the last star rating that you used. So let's just turn this back to 1, like so. All right, now let's go into the settings for focus stacking, because in the previous video I said just use the default settings. It's going to be fine most of the time, but there are times when you want to change it. So first thing we have here is set the number of shots. So that's how many bracketed, focus bracketed frames or pictures it's going to take. Generally, I recommend you try to take the maximum number that you can. This gives the camera the most number of data points that it can merge back together in the computational part. But there are times when you want to reduce this, and you can reduce this down to a 3 if need be, and we'll talk about that next. We have the focus differential. That's telling the camera how big of a step do you want to make between each step, each shot, in terms of focus. So this is a little bit trickier to explain, but I'll come back to this as well. But you have values between 1 and 10. And, you know, 5 is a good number to start with, but I'll explain this in more detail shortly. And then charge time, the default setting is actually 0, because we're going to make the assumption that we're not using a flash, but this is for your flash recycle time or charge time. And when you have this set to 0 seconds, it's going to go through these 15 frames very quickly. It may finish it in, you know, a fraction of a second. But if you need to have the charge, if you're using a flash, it needs time to recharge before it can fire again. So what you can do is you can set this, say, to 1 second, and that way the camera will take one picture with flash, it'll wait 1 second, that gives the flash time to recharge, and then it'll take the next picture, and so on. But you have to be conscious of now your focus bracketing set will take 15 seconds. So your scene needs to be very, very static. If anything moves in the frame while it's doing this sequence, it'll be blurry, or worse yet, the computational part of the stacking will fail and you'll have to start over. Now the charge time is going to be dependent upon the flash that you're using. If you're using a very good flash with, say, a lithium-ion battery, you might even be able to get away with 0.2 seconds. And if you're using like a Godox TT350, depending on the power setting, if you're at a low power setting, I'd say, you know, half a second to 1 second is fine. But if you're using your flash at full power, the Godox TT350, I'd recommend probably an 8-second charge time. And again, that's assuming your batteries are fully charged in the TT350. But something like a Godox V1 or 8400, you know, these things recycle very, very quickly. And you'll have to experiment a little to get a feel for what speed your flash can do. But that's what that's for. And I'll do a short demo of this as well. So what I want to do now is I'm going to take you into my virtual classroom, and I'm going to do my best to explain the focus stacking settings, the set number of shots, and the focus differential. So let's go to the whiteboard. What I want to do with this diagram is try to explain the different settings in the focus stacking menu. So the first one is pretty straightforward. Set the number of shots. We have a value of between 3 and 15 that we can enter. The default setting is 15. So what we're telling the camera is to take 15 pictures. The second number, set the focus differential. We can put a value between 1 and 10. And what we're doing now is telling the camera how far apart in terms of focus points do we want each shot to be. So the default setting is 5. So it's going to take 5 or 15 pictures, and each picture is going to be 5 focus differentials apart. And so this number is a little bit ambiguous, so let me try and simplify this even more. Let's say down here, look at the scale, 0, 5, 10, 15, and each notch is 1 foot in distance. And let's say we have a person standing here, and they're blindfolded. And then we have a person standing here at the 15-foot mark. And we want to give instructions to this blindfolded person how to get to the other person so that they can shake hands. And in terms of how many steps to take and how much distance each step will take him. So, and distance, right? Or we'll just say feet. So if we say take 15 steps, 1 foot each, clearly they will make it over to the other person and be able to shake hands, right? Because there's just 15 feet between them. Another scenario that works, right, is say take 5 steps, 3 feet each, right? So if they took 5 steps and separated each step by 3 feet, they would also be able to go up and shake hands with this person. And then finally, another one that theoretically could work takes 7 steps at 2 feet each, right? So if they take 7 steps, 2 feet apart, they would get almost right up to the person, about right here, but still close enough that they could, shake their hands, right? And that's all this over here is doing in terms of the focus stacking settings. The number of shots and the difference in distance between each shot relative to the focus point. So this is where it gets a little complicated, but in the simplest terms, all we're doing is what I just showed you here. Now let's apply these settings in the context of doing focus stacking. So focus stacking, if you recall, we always have a starting point and we want to focus in the middle or general area center of where we want in focus, in front of and behind. So we'll call that X. That'll be our starting point. Now, let me draw a couple of trees. Put one here. And we'll put one here. And what I want to do, we'll just put a little flower here too. What I want to do is take a picture of this tree here in the middle, and I want to get a little bit of the grass in front in focus and a little bit of the grass behind it in focus. So what would I tell, or what instructions would I put into the camera to achieve this? Well, we always have X. We're going to focus right here in the middle of the tree, and that's our starting point. And based on this scale, I would need to take one more here, one more here, one more picture here, one more picture here, and one more picture here. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We would need to take 6 pictures to capture the tree with a little bit of grass in front and behind. So I would set that to 6. The focus differential, we're just going to use the same scale where each notch is a focus differential of 1. So we would just set our focus differential to 1. So what's the camera going to do? It's going to take a picture here, and then it's going to adjust it's going to adjust the next shot to start at the beginning. So it's going to back up 2 notches, and then take a picture here, step one more, take a picture here, take another step. Actually, it's going to skip over that one, take a picture here and a picture here. So it's going to take all 6 pictures with a focus differential of 1, and that will achieve what I wanted for this focus stacking exercise, to get a little bit of the grass in front in focus and a little bit behind it in focus. So I would make my settings 6 shots with a focus differential of 1. Now, what if I wanted to get this tree and this tree in focus? What would my settings be? Well, wouldn't be too much different. We would have a starting point. Our starting point would change, right? To here, somewhere in the middle, between these 2 trees. And I would have to set the number of shots roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 this way, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in that direction. So we have 6 shots here, 6 shots here, plus the 1 in the center. That's going to be 13 shots. And the focus differential hasn't changed because we're still using the same scale of 1. So now if I make my settings 13 shots with a focus differential of 1, I'll be able to capture both trees plus a little bit of the grass in front and a tiny bit behind it, because I set my focus point here in the middle. Now, based on the first example I gave you with the instructions of telling the person how to reach the other person, there should be different scenarios or settings that work to achieve the same thing other than the one we just set of 13 and 1. If we look at this, intuitively you think maybe 5 shots with a focus differential of 5 should work, right? So let's count that off. We're going to do 5 shots. So that means 2 in this direction and 2 in this direction plus the 1 in the center. And the differential is 5. So we'll count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's going to be a picture here. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a picture here. And then back this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 here. And if we put these settings in the camera and take a picture, in theory, everything should be in focus, right? But it's not. And that's because of another variable we have to consider, and that's the depth of field of your camera and lens settings. Because depth of field is basically an area that's in focus when you pick a focus point. So you've probably heard, shallow depth of field for like portraits where the person's face is in focus and then everything in the background is blurry. And then you want a wide depth of field or a deep depth of field where maybe it's a few people in front of a building and you want to capture the person or the people in front of the building as well as the building behind them. You want that all to be in focus. And that's what's going to happen here. So if I had my lens set to say f2.8, that's going to be a very shallow depth of field. So what's going to happen is when I take my first picture, my depth of field might be this. And then when I take my second picture, my depth of field might be like this. And I shouldn't say second, but another picture. And then another picture, the depth of field, if my focus point is way out here, will be like this, maybe all the way out to infinity. But this picture here, the depth of field might only be this. And this picture here, the depth of field may only be this, because depth of field is also affected by the distance of the subject from the camera. So what's going to happen when you focus stack this image in camera, you're going to have all of this area out of focus, this area out of focus, and maybe a little bit in here, and then everything out here will probably be in focus. So what would be a potential solution to this problem where we have these gaps in the focus? Well, we could change the number of shots in differential, maybe do 8 shots with a differential of 3. So what would happen now is we would start with our focus point here, and then we would take a shot back, let's see, differential of 3, so 1, 2, 3. So there'd be a shot here, 1, 2, 3, a shot here, 1, 2, 3, a shot here. That's 3 that way. And then 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. So we would take 4 shots this way, 3 shots that way, plus this one, that would be 8 shots. And this closes the gap on the depth of field problem, right? Because now we have a shot here that would most likely fill the gap here. We have a new shot here that would fill the gap here. And then we have a new shot here that would fill the gap here. And then we have a shot here that would fill the gap here. Now there's potential that there'd still be a little bit in here out of focus. And it's also possible that this part may not be in focus anymore either because the focus point is moved up a little bit. So we can combine solutions by changing the settings here and increasing our aperture to say f5.6, for example. Then it's very likely that these 2 settings would work. Now, if you're still with me, I'm really impressed and I appreciate that. But what I showed you basically was an oversimplification of those settings. Because honestly, that set focus differential number is very, very ambiguous. And it's affected by so many factors. The distance of the initial focus point, the aperture and focal length of your lens, which affects the depth of field. And the index of the focus differential is not 1. Right? I just used 1 to try to simplify and explain the concept, but the focus differential might be only 1 millimeter instead of 1 foot, or sometimes the focal differential can be several meters between each shot. And again, that always depends on the distance of the initial focus point versus focal length, aperture, etc. But hopefully now at least you have some idea of how to solve any focus stacking problems you might run into. Typically, you don't run into problems with landscapes because the depth of field is so huge. You'll be fine. I mean, a lot of people, you don't even need to bother with focus stacking for landscapes. But when you're doing close-up photography, macro photography, or very close photography of just a few meters, those settings can make a difference in learning how to solve those problems. With practice, you'll be able to get much better results. So let me walk you through 1 or 2 examples, and then we'll talk about the flash, and then we'll be done, I promise. All right, so here's an actual example out of the camera. On the left here, I have my focus point on this little lighthouse, and I set the camera to take 15 pictures with a focus differential of 1. And what ended up happening was the differential steps were so small, I got all 15 shots in focus was just this part right here. So all I did is I increased my focus differential to 10. I focused on the same point here, and now you can see everything from this candle all the way out to the edge of the fireplace are now in focus. Now, if we look at this image here, you'll notice that now if we look at these images here, the image on the right came out much better because the image on the left, if we look particularly over here, you'll notice that this petal is totally out of focus, whereas the petal behind it is in focus. So what happened is I set my differential too high, so it just kind of skipped over this petal and went to this petal. Whereas the image on the right, both petals are in focus. And all I did was reduce my differential down to 4 instead of 7. All right, so not the most dramatic images, but I think they worked well for demonstrating problem solving when you're doing focus stacking. Now, I wanted to go on and show you how to do focus stacking with flash, but unfortunately, it didn't work. I think I may have found a bug because it would take the 10 images or 15, the flash would fire, but then when it came time to merge the images together, the camera just stopped and went back into shooting mode, and it didn't even try to merge the images together. So I'll have to report that to OMDS. Maybe they'll fix it in the firmware. But I will give you one more tip real quick, and that's with the silent shutter, because when you're shooting in focus stacking mode, the camera goes into silent sequential shooting, but you'll notice that my tripod is very shaky. So what you can do, and I recommend this in general whenever you're shooting on a tripod or anything else, is set a delay before the camera starts to shoot. So you do that in the drive mode in the menu. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. Go into the menu and then just rotate the rear dial over until you see the drive mode. So it's menu number 7. Scroll down to silent settings. And right now it's set to 0. So that means as soon as I push the shutter button, it's going to take a picture. But instead, I'll just have it wait maybe 4 seconds. And that should be enough time from when I push the shutter button and let go for this rig to kind of stabilize so I can get a sharp image. And that's it. So hopefully you like these kind of videos. If so, maybe consider making a small donation. I have the links down below. It really helps me out a lot. Or maybe subscribe, hit the like button. But either way, I appreciate you watching, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.